coming outside, so I think
All right.
it is that hour, 7:30. Let's begin. Welcome to everyone here, especially those who are not students on the campus. I see at least one person here who I'd say is visiting us from the larger community, so welcome here. And students, whether you've been to readings before, I hope especially some of you have not been to a reading before, this will be a good new experience. I'm Randy Vandermeer, and I'm a professor in the English department. And it's my pleasure to host our speaker for the evening, Brett Foster. I'll introduce him a bit later, but as you may know, we have lined up a short roster of students to read their own original work, one poet and 3 readers of their own short fiction. And looking forward to that. And Brett has already shown great enthusiasm for the students' work and interacted with them at a fiction class taught by Professor Orfila, and then also in a 2-hour session with members of the Writers Guild. And 2 of them will be among the 4 who read. I'm going to give brief introductions of the students who read, and then ask them to come up unannounced after that. And I asked them to send me a little bio, so I'm going to give you an introduction to the students in their own words. It has a little bit more flavor than I might have imparted to them. So Drew Hansen, right there, is going to read some of his poetry. Drew is from Miami, Florida, and he's an English major, first year, correct, Drew? Who spends his free time, crab trapping in the Keys. Didn't know that, did you, some of you? And reading his favorite poet, as of 1 month ago, A.R. Ammons. I told him about the poet. He said, I'm going to go get something by him. And went out and got him, and then I get an email, and no, my favorite poet is A.R. Ammons, and studying the Bible. And I guess this Ammons rank above the Bible in your... You don't have to rank it. It's okay.
Alphabetically.
Yeah. So that's Drew. Ashley will be our next reader. This is Ashley right directly in front of me, right? Ashley. As a sophomore education major and preschool teacher from Philadelphia. You're already a preschool teacher?
Yes.
Okay, not full-time though?
No.
Okay.
Not anymore.
Okay, and then you're not living a bi-coastal commute?
No.
Okay, good. She is a transfer student from the University of New Haven. We have a Yaley here.
Talk after that.
Talk. She enjoys writing, time spent with loved ones, and working with children. And what she said next touched me with the humility. It says, hopefully that's okay. There's not much to me. She didn't want me to read that. Yeah, I know you didn't want me to read that, but I must say I was touched by that. That's the most humble thing I've ever heard anyone say. And I'm sure, and it's also a lie. Which makes it especially interesting. Okay. Next, we'll have Laura Nepodo. And Laura is right there. Laura is the person who founded the Writers Guild. Oh, this happens to be Laura's sister. And are you also Laura's sister? We have 3 Nepodos in the room. And are you a brother also?
I am.
The whole family?
No, he's not.
No, she's lying to me. But you know, it's a night of fiction as well as poetry. So we're telling some fiction. All right. Go ahead, hug.
No, please continue. Don't.
All right. Laura says, Laura Nepodo is a 4th-year kinesiology major and a native to Santa Barbara. She enjoys various, get this, you probably couldn't anticipate the next word, brutish activities. The brute, Laura Nepodo, including rock climbing, riding her motorcycle, and weightlifting, along with more refined pursuits like coordinating and participating in the Writers Guild on campus. So thank you for that. Kettlebell instructor, Still actively doing that? Okay. And finally, Karis Kirch-Gessner, who I just met this afternoon in Professor Orfala's class. Karis Kirch-Gessner was born and raised in the city of San Francisco. She is the daughter of two pastors, and went to Buddhist high school, and is currently working towards an English major and communications minor at Westmont College. And she just returned from Westmont in Northern Europe fall semester. That was led by these two august personages. Learning about conflict and reconciliation with Dr. Chris Heckley and Dr. Sherry Larson Heckley. Karis will be co-directing Spring Sing for Emerson this year, and hopes you will all enjoy the production. What are the odds that you will walk away with the top prize?
It's about dorm unity and having fun.
Okay. Catch a slightly defensive tone there. All right. Thank you. I don't know that Emerson's ever won the top prize. This could be the year. All right, Drew, come on up. Say whatever you need to say. And the rest of
Okay, so before I start, I wanted to give a thanks to the Writers Guild because they give really valuable critiques, and I've gotten some really great friendships out of it, so yeah. Okay, the first poem that I'll be reading is called Psalm of Stress. For the chief musician, a psalm of the student. O stress, for it was you who conceived me from the abstract concepts. You melded each moronic cliché into coherent amalgams of word, and from the slime shaped style. Now in the subconscious nature of mind, like the stoicheia, you surround me, wind, water, fire, fill my soul, to slog through my bitter endings and begin again. Just when the pen smooths over the page, you clutch me. You shift my gears to scribble hard and well. Then when the parchment rots, a swollen symptom of hypergraphia, I may rest. You prod me to rack this rattled brain and to till the still decay of slaughtered ideas. Then glean from the greenest groves, knowledge unknown, an envelope plump with cyanide pills. And you, the gold image graven, perceive my thoughts afar off, where you simply pervade them. In my herald sways and hunched gait, purge me of the weak sojourns of the slothful, and lead me in the way everlasting. Okay. The second one that I'm going to be reading is called Metamorphosis. She wears a veil of gossamer and gathers posies with the tips of her teeth. After the hour that young women walk about, she floats spectral over the streets in a daze that is mildly disturbing. Then in the bustle of the city, you can see her in a crowd, if only you were looking. She herself is a wisp. Of what? The sift that gathers when you finger the wings of a butterfly. And then in a few days or a month, an inkling inches and forms, a chrysalis on the fringes of your mind, and asks you to ponder why she becomes so impuissant. You start to wonder why, oh why, you were ever dealt such coarse hands. Thank you.
Okay, so this is just like the first 2.5 or so pages of a short story that I wrote. And I'm picturing you all naked, so okay. 19 when I became another man's daughter. He cried because he wished he could fix me. He struggled to hold my weak and restless limbs and gather me into his shelter. My tears were the salt he craved. Streaks of Maybelline and red wine apathy, bare feet dangling over his military arms, we quenched a thirst we never knew we had. A conflagration in the night had stolen his flawless masculinity, and I had an algorithm for failure he couldn't live without. I released his flood of regret and swallowed it. I became his catharsis, and he filled my void. Was I really just his employee? The first time I felt his eyes warm my skin, I was 17, barefoot, and standing at the end of a darkened hallway holding one of his children. For months, we pretended we couldn't feel each other while I fed, bathed, powdered, rocked, soothed, and melded his flesh deeper into my heart. The heavily American thump of his boots electrified my body in a way I couldn't understand. I always wondered if he thought of my hands as he fed on the neatly preserved leftovers they prepared for him each night. Every drawing in Lego and race car would be long retired, and the table always left bare and Cloroxed for his convenience. Did he wonder what our day had been like before it was stowed away and sterilized? When he was present, he loved the way I could do anything with a baby on my hip. His baby. He loved when I had the kids lined up, directing them through a made-up backyard game, and when I helped them with their homework. When I taught the baby sign language, he looked at me like I was a NASA scientist, trapped in slavish domesticity. I never planned for a baby to end up on my inside. Those weeks of terrified glowing were the first weeks I saw the baby in my arms as my own. Suddenly, I couldn't remember the nurturing motions that had been so effortless before, and I stumbled through my days. In those weeks, I could sense frenzy in him. I knew that the feeling was eating him alive because he didn't know where it started and he was not allowed to react. When I disappeared for a week, I wondered if he really thought I was under the weather. Empty inside, I returned. Life had left me and my reasons for living had dwindled. In the deep freeze of winter, I became dependent on his warmth. What had started as a pleasant sensation on my skin became a necessity to my vitality. He didn't realize he was stepping into the angriest wound in my heart. The very first summer day, I slathered the kids with SPF 100 and snapped them out of their seasonal apathy. As I slid into my tiny black bikini and looked down at my flat belly, my mind wandered to the baby I would have soon had. That is, if things were different. I wouldn't have known I cried if not for the matter-of-fact inquiry of a 14-year-old with Down syndrome. "Why are you crying? I thought it's a nice day." I loved her, and I loved the resilience she harbored and poured out upon us all when things got tough. There was no reason for tears on such a perfect day. I pulled back her red hair and helped her into her swimsuit. I needed her as much as she needed me. We secured the baby in the stroller and lazily made our way to the lake. "Where does Daddy go when he leaves?" she asked as we unfolded beach chairs. "Daddy flies airplanes. He goes everywhere," I replied, knowing she wouldn't be satisfied. "He can't go everywhere. There are too many places." "Somehow he's found a way," I told her with a smile. I could tell she still wasn't content, but then neither was I, if I were honest.
Good evening, everybody. I am going to be reading an excerpt from a short story I wrote this semester. Just a little side note, there are a couple of lyrics in here from Led Zeppelin. I don't want to disrupt the flow too much, but I'll try and give you a little physical cue when I'm reading those lines so that you know how they tie in and aren't confused by who's talking. Smudged. The afternoon light angled in through dusty windows, casting twisted shadows on walls heavy with tackle and lures. The walls did little to mute the slop of nearby waves, and the old timber seemed to bleed the briny scent of the Caribbean blue more than the sea itself. "Cranberry, love?" asked the bartender, addressing a girl with noon blue eyes. She shifted her white cane with its red tip against her hip and nodded once. The barman then turned his head slightly toward a sun-weathered man a few seats down, the only other patron at the bar. "Another double, Mr. Ward," he rumbled. He seemed to speak more to the net that drooped from the ceiling over the man's head, rather than to the stolid man himself, who grunted in response. The bartender turned about and began pouring. Overhead, music coughed through an old speaker, vying with the scratching static. Take my hand, child, come with me. Mr. Ward rolled an empty glass between rough palms and glanced towards the girl. Lean and leggy, her striped cotton dress hung loosely off her narrow shoulders and clung to the shallow valley between her budding breasts. She was a fair, flaxen thing. Your father know what you've been doing on that computer those late nights? The young girl's back stiffened, and those sightless eyes, pale and watery, stared holes through the bottles behind the bar. You better hope he doesn't if you don't want to be gutted, Mr. Ward. Never mind who you are. It's my own damn business. She turned her head slightly towards him, chin tilted up. She was wearing lipstick, but it was overdone, smudged on her thin lower lip. Besides, he don't give much of a shit anyway. He's got some kind of lady over most nights. He likes rum too, you know. The light stuff, though. He don't remember much most days. The bartender set the ready drinks on the bar, placing hers close to her hand, her fingers splayed against the dull wood. Mr. Ward's he placed on a square napkin and slid carefully before the man, then left the bar to the pair and the 3 empty seats between them. Then what's to stop us, pretty baby, but what is and what should never be? Static. A breath of air heaved through Ward's nostrils, hard as the turn of his mouth. You're real young. You don't know what you're asking, girl, not really. You posing to be a thing who you're not. It's easy to do on those web pages. You fooled me real good, and I ain't no fool. These islands are awful small, though, and they're full of indecent sorts. She turned then, facing him fully from the bar stool. Her petite hand touched the stool closest to her that stood between them, and she slid herself onto it with an unexpected grace. The dress slid up a ways, revealing a pale thigh sprinkled with fine blonde hair. The cranberry juice slid down the bar, cupped in her other hand, slow and steady. She lifted her face towards his and knew just where to look right into his eyes, like she'd practiced it, holding his gaze long and heavy. Maybe you don't know what sort I am, Mr. Ward. He took a draught of the umber rum and was quiet for a time. He remembered her around the docks when she was a little thing. She'd had the skin of an island girl then, all sunbathed and joyful, back before the infection took her sight and her mama's courage with it. Her mama had had a wild heart that raged on those islands, and the thought of tending a broken child was something more than she could handle and something more than her daddy cared for. The girl didn't come around the docks anymore after her mama had gone and the drink got her daddy, like the warmth of the day had been snuffed all out. Now she was soft and pliable as warm white sand, and Mr. Ward thought on this as his eyes wandered. She was, after all, a fair thing, and those islands were full of indecent sorts. And happiness is what you need so bad, girl. The answer lies with you. The lines in Ward's brow hardened. He looked away from those 2 cold eyes to her 2 red mouth, a thin sheet of sweat above it. None of it's going to make him love you anymore, he said. Your daddy, he still won't see you, not even the whole of where you were when you're long gone. She smiled, a twisted, tired thing, too old for her lips. You're a sure man, Mr. Ward, but I don't think you know much about nothing. The damp glass left a dripping trail where she ran it across her brow and set it down again carefully. I don't like cranberry juice much myself. With a searching hand, she patted the nearby stool until she found the steel cane in the strap of her backpack. She stood, and her sweating skin peeling away from the old vinyl stool top echoed the static from the radio overhead. He watched her, poised like some kind of dancer or fighter. He wasn't quite sure what. As she moved out into the sticky light, he realized he'd never known her name.
Hi, I'm Karis. So again, this is the first half of a short story that I wrote for our class. As Pastor Wesley began the benediction, the laywoman shoved her doodle-filled bulletin into her purse and shifted around in the pew to look for people she knew. Unsuccessful, she nervously glanced at her phone to avoid small talk with people she didn't know. The laywoman squeezed down the staircase towards the fellowship hall, shoulder to shoulder with indistinguishable members of the church body. She smiled meaninglessly at vaguely familiar churchgoers gathering coffee and asking about promotions, kids, and vacations, all things she did not possess. Barely distracted by the ratio of human bodies to square footage, which was more akin to a free music festival than a post-church coffee hour, the laywoman lifted herself onto her tiptoes to spy the senior elder. Her eyes landed on a white head by the coffee dispenser. She pushed through bodies, Bible-holding arms dug elbows into her sides until she finally reached the coffee cart. "I need to have a word with you," the laywoman said, out of breath, as she skidded up to the fold-out camping table covered in evenly lined styrofoam cups of coffee. "Of course," said the senior elder. "I'm just dishing out coffee. Come stand with me." His motions were almost robotic in contrast to his welcoming voice. He pressed the top of the dispenser, coffee forcefully dumping into the styrofoam cups at the same rate each time. The laywoman paused and took a deep breath. "I don't like the way the elders are handling this." "I'm not sure what you mean." The senior elder paused to smile toothlessly at a woman passing by, squeezing the fleshy part of her upper arm in greeting. The white wisps of fine hair fell over his forehead as he leaned to dispense a new cup of coffee. "Last night's email, you made it clear that you're trying to fire Pastor Wesley." "Yes, I am." The laywoman's spring dress began to soak in sweat at the small of her back. She whispered, "There are people everywhere. Can we take this into the kitchen?" "I'm not ashamed to voice my opinion," said the senior elder, passively ignoring her request. The laywoman exhaled unsteadily. The fellowship hall buzzed as the post-church conversations peaked in volume. The beige wall sconces gave off a dull glow into the 70s-style fellowship hall. The laywoman blindly watched older church ladies stocking cookies on the orange felt-padded tablecloths. The wood-paneled walls looked slightly greasy. Children pranced by holding bunches of leftover body of Christ in their hands, giggling. "Fine," she relented. "Would you please give me your reasons for wanting to fire Pastor Wesley?" "I sent the email to people who I thought would be able to handle the complexity of this erudite and deeply biblical situation." He didn't meet her eyes as the laywoman stared in anticipation. He continued, "Matthew 18:15 through 17 states, 'If your brother or sister sins, go and point out their fault, just between the two of you. If they listen to you, you have won them over. But if they will not listen, take one or two others along, so that every matter may be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. If they still refuse to listen, tell it to the church. And if they refuse to listen, even to the church, treat them as you would a pagan or a tax collector." The senior elder recited the verses in perfect memory. His tone was mundane. It lilted downwards at every pause, as if it were as common as the Lord's Prayer. He started again. "Pastor Wesley has failed to cater to the needs of the people, and I am doing my godly duty by telling the church of our pastor's sins and now treating him as a pagan." "He has been our pastor for 10 years now. He's not a pagan. Who has he failed to cater to?" Now, gossiping is a sin." He looked at her dead on. His glacial, Swedish eyes speared the laywoman's darker face. She noticed he hardly had eyelashes. "Bullshit." So surprised at herself, she wavered and looked around the room. No one heard, but the senior elder raised his eyebrows, eyelids closed, as if he had witnessed a distressing sin. "I cannot speak to you if you use such a tone. I don't know what to say to you," the senior elder spoke softly. The laywoman's face pinked, and she debated whether to feel guilty or stand firm in her place. She measured her words evenly. "Please tell me who is complaining about Pastor Wesley." The senior elder took several exaggerated breaths. "Several members and elders have witnessed and experienced being pushed aside and joked with when we have come for counsel from Pastor Wesley. That's hardly a serious offense, and yeah, right, several members, you mean yourself, your wife, and your followers. I am being honest when I say these claims are genuine. We have confronted him with our concerns, and he has blatantly ignored us, made fun of us even. But more importantly, he has turned a blind eye to his own sin. There's nothing else to do. Pastor Wesley lacks integrity, shepherding skills, and honestly, his combination of liberal teaching and Catholic tendencies in spiritual practice are concerning." "That doesn't sound like Pastor Wesley at all, and what in the world is wrong with Catholic tendencies?" Several kids in the youth group began to stare.
You have a program that gives you biographical facts about Brett Foster. I met Brett about 1 year ago in this room. We had a conference on Christianity and literature, a circle of poets, and Brett was one of those invited to read there. And he was visiting with Jonathan Wilson, the editor of Books and Culture, and immediately struck up conversation. I thought, what an engaging person this is. Little did I know how much of a life as a man of letters and a poet and a teacher and a scholarly critic he is. You'll hear him referred to as a Renaissance man, and that's fair because he is a teacher of Renaissance literature, but also because he has been many things. In addition to the few things I've listed, I learned this afternoon that at your age, most of you, he had long hair and would have considered himself a competitive, highly competitive BMX biker.
Freestyle. Yeah.
I stand corrected.
No, it's more or less the same, yeah.
Okay, picture that. Also, you'll find if you say anything to Brett, you will find that he has something also to say about that subject. And if you know anyone, he also knows that person. Or it's more like this, that I'll say, I know of someone, and he knows that someone, and is probably spending the summer in that person's beach house. So that's the kind of person we have here, and a teacher, I'm sure a beloved teacher, judging from the way with students that we saw and the way with literature we saw exemplified in the classroom this afternoon, generously giving his time to the students today. I really do not know where he's getting his energy from, because this is the eighth hour of nonstop activity that we've put him through. So, Brett, before you crash, come and read for us. Thank you.
Soar briefly, then crash. All right. I can't begin to say just what a great honor it is to be here, to be back here. It really was about a year ago, a little less, reading in this room that, would make Henry James envious. This room is just so lovely, and that reading circle was a real pleasure to be a part of. And so I got to say to departmental members, that whole conference was just a great, great occasion of fellowship and inquiry and debate and more fellowship, and it was just wonderful. So it's just a real pleasure to be here and get to share some work with you. Wow, Drew, Ashley, Laura, Karis, that was awesome. What a great format. When I heard about it, I'm like, that's brilliant. I love the thought of getting to read with some of the Westmont students and fellow writers. And you don't need me to commend you, but I do commend you. I just really enjoyed each of those pieces you read tonight. I feel honored to follow you. Just a couple final words of thanks. I'm really just thrilled too. You're like, this guy's really thrilled about a lot of things, actually. But the occasion kind of calls for that, and so I hope it's okay to take a moment here beginning just by expressing this. To be a part of the liberal arts reading and lecture series is just something dear to me and a great honor. So thanks to the folks at the Gady Center for the invitation. Thanks to the English department also for just the work and having me visit. My colleague Jeff Davis just came back from the big conference here at Westmont last week, and when you see a colleague and they're just like they're lit up. They've just been in 3 days of really intellectually stimulating atmosphere, and not that the home office is never intellectually stimulating, of course it is, but it was just great to see a colleague who I think has had a busy and demanding term, and being out here in that great intellectual company and on a theme that's dear to him as it is to those in the center. That was just really cool. So again, and one last word of thanks. I want to just thank Professor Vandermeer and really Professor Willis as well. We've become good friends in the last few years, and I have to tell you, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about this as I get underway in the reading, particularly the second half of the reading with some newer work, but it's been a tough year, and really you're going to hear with one particular poem. It all began, not that it was caused here, as you'll understand, but really was at this remarkable conference and go home and start feeling some kind of upper abdominal symptoms, and soon found out I had colon cancer. And had a surgery to remove a tumor, had complications from the surgery, slow recovery. The cancer had spread, so I needed 6 months of chemotherapy, which again, I feel in many ways I was spared some of the rigors you hear about people facing, but it was crummy, to be perfectly honest. And anyway, this gentleman here to my right, contacted me, hearing my news, was going to be out in the California area, and that all just dissolved, rather disappointingly. And he just so sweetly said, well, and so gentle too, like, well, I mean, let's just see how you're doing, and don't feel any pressure by this, but would love to have you come out in the spring if you're well enough. And I just wrote back from the hospital, at DuPage County Hospital, and said, well, that's my goal. I appreciate you just making that available, and as a possibility, like, I'm going to focus on that and get through these rigors. And so I hope it's been a great day. I mean, just in any situation it would be, but just been deeply meaningful to be here, getting to be a part of the classroom today in the Writers Guild, and I just can't tell you enough. And these two gentlemen too would just check in with me regularly all through the year, and that just meant the world to me. Just, how are you doing? And you mentioned a friend kind of going through a similar thing and kind of comparing notes, and I just really appreciated that. It's just good to have this public chance to tell you both how much that meant to me. Well, let me begin with a California poem, if I can. And this one really reflects a time when my wife and I, my daughter Avery, who is here with me tonight, I'm very honored to say, she was, I think, on her way, as they say. So she was born in Palo Alto, just about 6 months before we moved all the way across the country to Connecticut. And I hope just for all of you, I know there's some seniors in the room. Can I just ask how many seniors are in here? So a few of you I know just from meeting earlier today. I feel like it's a poem you'll relate to. It's a perspective poem. That word came up today. And I'm going to use the word premonition here in a second as well. But yeah, just wondering what's ahead. Wishing you could control your uncertainty. Trying to be in the moment, something that I've been more aware of a lot this year. So this is called Westward in the Fading Moments of Any One Day. Not quite a Santa Barbara setting, but a Bay Area setting. So, late afternoon and the sun setting lower, floating on the horizon, the tree line bearing its balmy weight. A strange light surrounded us, the peninsula's hidden burn. The back roads that led to Pescadero rose and fell and carried us past orchards, then twisted through dark redwood groves so tightly we were almost carsick. A threat that felt somehow romantic. Maybe it anchored our evening to the real. Maybe it made us vulnerable. Since it all went well, it needs to happen more often. And racing to the ocean, the day all but gone, we noticed a hollow where a stand of trees fell under the contour of the last hillside. Twilight filled this place with brimful sweetness, a landmark to map what was out there, whatever would follow. It's my wish to every student in here, the seniors especially. It's kind of sometimes a time of uncertainty and anxiety, I realize. I'm going to read one more poem from this strangely titled, admittedly, book, The Garbage Eater, and then one as well from a little chapbook called Fall Run Road. And I hope this doesn't seem too weird. These became for me, giving what I was facing in the past year, what I'll kind of call premonition poems. So I have a kind of a current manuscript draft right now, and it kind of begins with 5 premonitions, these poems that were like, that's kind of creepy and eerie, and one particularly I was going to be keen to share in a few minutes. But yeah, it's funny. In some ways it's like, oh. But in other ways, as a fellow poet, an essayist, and get ready, undertaker, a little odd, that mix of vocations, but Thomas Lynch, a writer I've admired for 2 decades now, and have been grateful to have some contact with. But he does say that, he would say I shouldn't be surprised at all at these premonition poems, because what do poets focus on? What he primly calls the horizontal mysteries, sex and death. So for a poet to have poems, looking ahead to maybe a time of trial health-wise, maybe shouldn't be too surprising. This is called Evening When the Secret Vanished. Afterwards, he told her what the doctor said and surmised, and promised, like mother with child, to keep his strength, to suffer the long-winded pageant of specialists waving their diagnostic banners. She recognized the night's unusual details, failed the fathoming. Why this place? The hour's drive, his grave politeness. She noticed lipstick traces on her water glass, asparagus head buried in a bed of lettuce. In a cove at sunset in a crescent bay, the secret vanished, and if not wholly gone, then opened within itself more fully, with dreadful folding, a pair of enclosures over the one stark truth. He gave her the news he'd harbored to live with these few weeks. His speech suspicious of confusion, he confessed none of the stunned or aghast business of possible losing. Words not lost, but hidden, gain the more aware regions. This sad man locked in a body's solitude, and around him, huddled forms of foothills, the surf's white agate points, and moonlight like an unction covering the face of water. And again, when I wrote that, I got a perfectly poetic license. I just imagined the scene, this awkwardness, and why this occasion, and it became, obviously a lot more real, in those months after last May. So this last poem from these couple of books here, I'll turn to some other works, and works coming out in a forthcoming collection, and then again, in the second half here, some more recent work. Recent work's funny, isn't it? I love hearing people read things I can't go get, and it's in manuscript and it's marked on, and the other people are like, well, why don't you finish it first? How about that? So whatever your reaction, thanks for humoring me with some of these later poems here in a few minutes. But this one is simply called Mortal Dialectic, and just, the whole structure really is that dialectic form of a thesis and antithesis and synthesis, and so that kind of just gives you the structure. I think the rest will speak for itself. There is this phrase, annus mirabilis, it was miracle year. I'll just give some little annotation too. Mortal dialectic. It's about years and hoping to have them. More years out there always, good ones or otherwise, to thrive in the living remaining, to glean the rest steadily, is the old man's answer, infants, legacy, unforgivable squander of the charlatan, the near suicide's compromise with her own beating heart, durable as a stone. Wizened saint in a ghetto street, the moon, the septuagenarian, will reorbit soon. The 90-year-old poet at the height of her powers, their dwindling means to blaze. Or they matter little. Rather for days of greatness go forward, just a few, and if not that, at least a certain near perfection in the hard art of being. After despair or work, there comes something not unlike peace. Walk home from the train and take a bath, bare, at rest, satisfied. Easy to die tonight. The body is sieve or annus mirabilis. Who believes the short life of Keats was tragic, incomplete in its wisdom? His great spark lights the tramways of eternity. We're all about the same. By each try simply to merit the fitness of a lone occasion and match what's given. Time makes one arc, the earnest and enduring theme. Well, it's become a heavy reading all of a sudden. Sorry about that. Let me read something short, but I promise a little bit more lively. I kind of was thinking with my lovely daughter in the audience here, I don't want to embarrass her. I mean, she sometimes appears in poems, and she's here only indirectly in a later one, but it's really cool about her going to a concert at the Aragon Ballroom in Chicago, so that'll come up in a little bit. But here's a poem that really has a reference to her 12-year-old brother. But it's not really about him, it's just an occasion to think about, what we're celebrating tonight. It is wonderful student writing, just the powers of language, the powers of story, the powers of lyrical attention, in Drew's case. This is called Lexical Reverie. Now say, public library, 3 times fast, and feel your voice give corners to the air. Now hear the funny names my son has carried. Boots and Gusto, Bips and Bixby, Mr. Sassafras and Pickle Feather? Try that one on for size. The skies in our heads are bright with characters. Songs, constellations, linguistic cataract. Steadily hewn home by angel tongues, words realize. So go write some poems and stories tonight, everybody. I think that's the main theme of that one. This next one, some of you might remember this event a few years ago. I think a book just came out about their collective story about these miners trapped in such depressing details. 300 feet down in a collapsed mine shaft. And so in this one, I just try to apply that to our own circumstances and conditions. We all are sometimes in our circumstances like those Chilean miners. We're all kind of stuck in a shaft, and we're just kind of, again, physically or emotionally, we're in that place, and we're just waiting for the sound of that drilling as these miners were kind of dramatically aware of that people were trying to reach them. And you're going to hear about the kind of just slow and laborious, cramped way that they had to be brought back up to the light. So again, I've found a poem like this kind of weirdly allegorical. It's about the sense we have and hoping, hoping in our faithful way that there'll be some kind of ascent or recovery as well. This is called Improbable Rescue of the Heart. And I should say a couple of these now is transition. The last one and this one, then I'll move on to some newer work, but they're in a collection. I'm just really pleased. It's nice to get good news in a bad season, isn't it? And so I was waiting forever from the publisher of this first book, Northwestern, to get back to me, and I'm like, it's been a long time. I better just count on it not necessarily being good news. And so I get an email from the editor, get ready, on my anniversary day. And we had plans in a rare way to go out for tapas and then go see Birdman. And I was like, if this is bad news, you might ruin the anniversary day. So with a great kind of serene ability, I just knowing it was going to be a nice night, not wanting to be the bored, I just didn't check it till the next day, and thankfully, my patience was rewarded, and it was just some good news about this new book coming out later this year. It's called Extravagant Rescue, is the title of that book, and that also just feels a little bit more fitting these days. But anyway, thank you for that just little context here. Improbable Rescue of the Heart. Receiving a good update and good words from you, sending dispatches from the front, your overworked mother's life in Denver. Most glad to hear your ever-sensitive capacity, ever expanding for joy. As with your rhapsodic soul in Gmail. Glued to CNN.com right now, watching Chilean miners get rescued. Oh, my heart! And bless that heart. May its nerve be prophecy against this one. Scheduled muscle mainly. The heart that bears its function, nothing more. That circulates its weariness and gall. Designs and deigns to be hauled around on daily errands. What a tiny, bitter punk it can become. They all need similar desolations, don't you think so? The briefer the better. But a condescension, nevertheless, plummet in darkness. till a gracious scent drilling breaks the lining, makes a tomb mouth. Every heart needs a season of forthcoming. 20 minutes upward in a cylinder. The world's good-willed care meets it at the top. And from the dusty opening, the heart emerges, once again steps blinkingly forth into the blessed grove of our living as the broad expanses brightly greet it. And soon, as a kind of counter-explosion that heals all, or seeming so, 1,000 flares of camera flashes telegraph one wish, signal rare and never dared sought welcomes. The heart's made steady, fed and blanketed, surrounded by those other besotted hearts and their carriers. Some chose to write it all down there, but appreciate just the same, radiant now, the day's invisible stars. If that image is quite grotesque or not, thinking about the heart taking on that role of the miners and suddenly the heart in a cylinder coming up above ground. Maybe you wouldn't want to see that, I'm not sure. But anyway, well, let me turn now to some poems. I got to talk about this in wonderful fiction class today. I think when you suddenly realize you're quite sick, and seriously so, you're thinking, well, I may just not write through all this. It's going to be brutal, and the treatments will be weakening. And I've been so grateful. And again, those of you who are in literature classes, and I like this stuff, and I'll say a bit more about the kind of influence and the resourcefulness of literature, but it's not just been something I enjoy, but something I've deeply needed, and have been deeply grateful and satisfied, and even defiant in getting to write about some of these just intense new experiences I've had over the last year. So I'm going to share just a few more, maybe a half dozen of these poems in the second half of this reading. And the first one's really special to be reading here. Almost a little, just my neck hairs are rising a little bit as I get ready to tell you about this. So I mentioned this conference, so wonderful, stimulating talks, great sessions, and it's mid-May, and so really for much of the spring term, it's like I'm not writing very much. I'm going to events and hosting readings and teaching classes and grading papers, and so I was in a session where a good fellow, I think he's from Eastern Mennonite, was giving a talk on Marilyn Robinson, and this is really rude, I shouldn't be saying this while it's being filmed. I think writers sometimes just do this. You can't help it. You're like, I just love that phrase he used. And there's a Marilyn Robinson phrase. It's pretty awesome. And before I knew it, I was kind of writing a sonnet as I was kind of working it out, quatrain by quatrain. There's that feeling I didn't quite finish it by the end of the session. Probably better that way. But again, had a lovely host, and so marched back to where we were staying at the Willis's place there, and it's like, I just gotta, I think I was either at your table or at the back porch and finished this. So it came very quickly. And I guess what I want to say about it before reading it, I've dated it May 17, 2014. It seemed important to kind of say, this is when this happens. It's so weirdly, again, there's a premonition to it. And I'll tell you, on my flight back to O'Hare, I got in on a Sunday night, midnight. I've been having these really intense upper abdominal pains. And it's like, that's weird, I haven't felt this, and it doesn't feel like I could just pick up a bug or something. It's higher up. And again, this was the tumor suddenly, finally, I would like to say, making itself known to me physically. And I don't want to have sort of mystical poet thoughts here, but I was really struck with a title, which is called One Carries It Around Within. And an image you're going to hear quite explicit. The kind of a little bit more haunting word, irradiate. Just like I look back at this poem, I don't know if it like inspires me or gives me the creeps or some weird mix of both, but a friend just said, sometimes maybe our poetic thinking is even more aware of what we kind of bodily are aware of. And so I'll just leave that for you to kind of think about and determine. But this is called One Carries It Around Within. Doctrine can never be belief. Doctrine is one means only to register belief. Like a job interview conducted briefly. or census taker who never sees the tin of steaming tamales, much less taste them. He makes his tallies door to door without relief. Sometimes doctrine is most felt as a grief, hard in the bones or sorrow's marrow when prodigious clumps of cells become prolific. The other part is like a funny gift, there in your bones as well, but lonelier, late, sent from a shipping station far in the distance. Open but barely known, it still irradiates your every admiration for existence. This next one, I gotta be honest, I hope it feels immediate, kind of in the moment, but it kind of came a little bit later. Finally getting out of the hospital after a few weeks. And I was on a liquid diet. I don't even know how to deal with that. This sucks. It's just really not at all pleasant. I wouldn't recommend that as a method of weight loss. Broth you can only enjoy for so many meal servings, and you're kind of just, despairing. And again, I think the writers in here will appreciate this. My happiest moment about this particular next poem, called Hospital Sonnet, is like, I heard the painkiller names I was on like 80 times, 90 times, but in my head, this wouldn't stick with me. And so there I was doing like Google searches later in the summer, like, oh, that's painkillers for cancer. Like, no, that wasn't it. And abdominal surgery, painkillers, and then I finally was able to figure out these two different painkillers that, and it just felt good to like get those details rendered in the poem, And finally, there's an image in the second half of this sonnet that just haunts me still. It's really kind of an emblem of theodicy, the problem of pain. Why is there suffering? And, I think about kind of children in that setting. I've been grateful that I have dealt with this and not my children. And I think about other children who do deal with this and just my sense of their heroism and courage and endurance. I had no capacity to kind of imagine it like I can imagine it a little better now. Hospital Sonnet. I need not think that everything is good, all that happens, each thing that occurs within and to our stubborn, misunderstood bodies. What are the odds? Where are the cures? And what does it mean to be willed by God? Maybe that's Dilaudid or Toradol talking. A chemical Scheherazade full of self-forgetting stories, 1,000 scrolls of rulers long departed. Getting x-rays, I cannot look away from that smaller pad with cartoon animals to shield radiation. In what other world was it decreed or made? Code trauma ER. Code trauma ER. Harder mysteries visit us where we are. I don't know if I can promise this next one's lighter, but it has a kind of a little whimsical quality to it, that maybe a little shift of tone here. And I mentioned this coyly, I must say, like, come to the reading and hear what I'm really talking about in that fiction class today. But again, you hear something and you start just like, what's that mean exactly? What a weird thing for a surgeon to say. And then you kind of figure it out. And so this is called Funny Hospital Saying. I'm not sure why I found it so endearing, the surgeon's always saying upon hearing his patient's slightly hopeful rephrasing a reply just after he's been told the how and the why of the surgery or recovery, a fine mineral fear inset in optimism. From your mouth to God's ear. The surgeon said it encouragingly with a smile. Considering it, it took me only a little while to realize what it signified. We can't really know, but it's good to hope so. Who knows? I mean, let's hope so. But also don't mistake my taking of a measure, my neutral explanation. Elsewhere is your treasure or rescue, if any exists. Nothing is promised either. By then, I was content to drift in uncertainty's ether. And I realize now I should have given a little context for that last word. I think originally it goes back to the Greek, means the air of the gods, and things like this. And I kind of associate it with like grim medical scenes and World War I, where again some of the conditions and pain control were just unbearable to kind of think about. And so that ether has a kind of loaded, menacing quality for me. I should have set that up a little better. I did want to make a point tonight, given this sort of wonderful liberal arts context for this occasion together, that as I said a little bit earlier, reading has meant the world to me during this time of sickness and sorrow and uncertainty and struggle, and all sorts of reading. So, one example, I just went back to a lot of those kind of classic pagans. Hope that's okay to talk about. Seneca, on the shortness of life. Cicero on living and dying well. Here's a quotation from Epictetus. What else can I do, a lame old man, but sing hymns to God? If I were a nightingale, I would do the nightingale's part. If I were a swan, I would do as a swan. But now I am a rational creature, and I ought to praise God. This is my work. I do it, nor will I desert my post, so long as I'm allowed to keep it. And I exhort you to join me in this same song. It might be a pagan author, but I find that really helpful and meaningful. And yet, on the other hand, I come across, reading the great theologian Hans Urs von Balthasar, a comment like this, referring to our having to learn to endure the glance of God. He quotes Augustine at one point, seeing the one who is seeing you. And he says wonderfully, he says, when we see so many of our social acquaintances, we see them socially, but not personally. I'm kind of humbled by that, even thinking about just close friendships. And do I see people personally? Am I really to really encounter them? Such enduring, says von Balthasar, would be the opposite of the Stoics hardening his face. It would be yielding, declaring oneself beaten, capitulating, entrusting oneself, casting oneself into Him. And I think I was kind of maybe feeding on the Stoics a little bit too much, hardening a little bit. And so for this next pair of poems, I'd like to share with you, I'm a great Renaissance and Reformation lover, I must admit. So I like to share these early translations of our scriptures with students so often, because they're familiar with their NIV versions or their, New Living Bibles, and I love having these verses which they're familiar with, just kind of ring in the ears a little differently. So whether it's King James, and I just like to read a few passages from the Gospel of Mark and William Tyndale's translation, 1526. It's going back a ways here. The beginning of the Gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, as it is written in the prophets. Behold, I send my messenger before thy face, which shall prepare thy way before thee. The voice of one that crieth in the wilderness, prepare ye the way of the Lord, make his paths straight. John did baptize in the wilderness and preach the baptism of repentance for the remission of sins. And all the land of Jewry and they of Jerusalem went out unto him and were all baptized of him in the river Jordan, acknowledging their sins. John was clothed with camel's hair and with a girdle of a beast skin about his loins. And he ate locusts and wild honey and preached, saying, Stronger than I cometh after me, whose shoe latchet I am not worthy to stoop down and unloose. I have baptized you with water, but he shall baptize you with the Holy Ghost. So this next poem is simply called The Forerunner, with a little epigraph of Mark 1 from Tyndale's version. It's possible that this sickness, the crisis, this disease, may turn out to be a messenger sent before my face, a voice that was crying out in the wilderness of my abdomen. My colon, being considerably reduced, is now made straight. What other preparations will be required? What of this remission? The present severities have invited my repentance, but the baptism of suffering may make the river Jordan feel most like the Jordan, leaving me, if not restored, at least cleansed or scoured, and hopefully made more lucid, if less vivid, by pain's disfigurements. And so, still being here for the time being, I will wear my camel hair coat and girdle of beast skins. I have been humbled and become unworthy to unbuckle anyone's shoe latchet. Yet I have never gone without my hearty portions of locusts and wild honey, which have nourished these poems and their record of witty devastations. Less honey-tongued, it may as well be confessed, than filled like a castanet with the rough, hollowed carapaces of all of those locusts. And is the time full come? I fear the future's silver platters. These poems, they are the tiniest of nets cast into the sea, and even these, despite the summer months I have spent with the net's dressings, will be eventually forsaken. And I, finally, just another powerless scribe. Even so, the locusts for a few moments provided declines gourmand a most remarkable gusto. And then this next one is a really special one to me. I think I maybe have shared this with Professor Willis or an earlier version of this. I think in our culture particularly, sort of self-reliance and independence and freedom, it's weird to be in a very needful place. And some of you in this room, I'm sure, have been there, whether because of sickness or maybe financial need or whatever it might be, emotional need. And I got to say, at first, it was so discomforting. Oh, I'm so sorry, bringing a meal over, that's so kind, and like, we'll enjoy it and don't be troubled by it, And again, we've been blessed in our community in Wheaton, colleagues, church family, so much just care, so much just attention, and you're humbled by it, and I think in some ways this is a small thing I could do to kind of show that appreciation. I want to say, if you know Seamus Heaney's great work, and by the way, it's always foolish to read any lines by Heaney and then read your own line. Really, was that a good idea? I think this poem, if I really think about it, it wasn't just from reading Mark, but it was from knowing and remembering a wonderful sonnet of his from, I think, the series called Glanmore Revisited. So it's a set of sonnets. But it begins, "You are the one for skylights. I oppose cutting into the seasoned tongue and groove of pitch pine." And you hear Heaney there, don't you? This consonants just churning and working wonderfully. And here's how that sonnet ends. "But when the slates came off, extravagant sky entered and held surprise wide open. For days I felt like an inhabitant of that house where the man sick of the palsy was lowered through the roof, had his sins forgiven, was healed, took up his bed, and walked away." So I was just kind of inspired remembering Heaney bringing that into a very contemporary and personal domestic space and poem. And so this one's called For My Friends. "The frequency of your kindnesses to me is deserving of acknowledgement. Will it provide you with some thin glimpse, at least, to say that I have felt at my best because of you in these worst of mortal days? To have lived this one life so multiply, surrounded by friends of an uncommon sort, immeasurable comfort, source of my pride. You cared for me in ways that made me feel like the paralytic who gets carried over to that gathering at Capernaum, maybe at the healer's own place. The front door is unapproachable because of the crowds. And like so, all summer you have hauled me around on my stretcher, And when the entrance was barred to us, you climbed atop the roof and began sawing through it, even hoisting me up there, keeping me steady and level as we ascended the ladder. What an effort it demanded. I usually picture in my doubtless presumptuous modern way that the roof was thatch. And even so, it would be no easy task to open up that skylight on my behalf. Just so, you have lowered me into that room where a message is being heard. Something about all things being restored, made new. And there I am, well-meaning interrupter, empowered by a well-meaning crew. And I can still feel your presence above me, the weight of me and yours sustaining it, the rope digging into and burning your palms. Down here, I am unwavering in expectation for some remark about forgiveness, though I really don't know what it will mean to be told, get up, pick up your stretcher, and make your way home. I question the home that is spoken of and the nature of that invited rising. In any case, I feel sure I would do so quickly, both thrilled with sudden motion, but also, truth be told, glad to be done with all of this fuss. I like to imagine, too, you guys still around the skylight, wondering how easily you'll lift the empty stretcher from the house. Your smiles and handshakes as you descend from the roof, mission done, and then stash the ladder somewhere and race to meet me in one of our places, a dark back corner at Bavarian Lodge or Muldoon's, or perhaps the side porch August evening at Two Brothers. You will not forget the stretcher exactly, and neither will I. I don't envision feeling confident enough to throw it away for good, but how glad and relieved I will be after our pints, my treat, to store it away in a closet, not thinking about it, not at all, till I have need of it again. I want to be sensitive to time tonight, so I'll just read a couple final poems. Let's see, if I may, I'm going to read three last poems, not as long as that one. Oh, I thought, okay. A little reassurance there for a crowd on a busy night. Some of these poems, we were talking about journalism and literature, and like where is there help and overlap and symbiosis there, and a lot of these poems I've been writing really are just like, well, this is a weird situation I didn't think I'd be in. And that was a bizarre thing to overhear. And so they really are little like eyewitness accounts of, hopefully you read that and you can settle for that and not maybe encounter it yourself. But this is very typical of a lot of these weird, wild new poems. It's called Overheard Today. There's loud, intermittent snoring behind the drawn curtain to my right. And on my left, past the cubicle wall, a young woman weeps over a cup of water. With chemo, she just can't bear to drink anything. The doctor is mighty stern with her today, more than is usual, warning of kidney damage and recuperation being set back. It's just a cup of water, the patient pleads, hoping the hated doctor's order could be that much more quickly discarded, and wishing to disavow that in her distress she's turned the cup into Vesuvius, insurmountable and prone to become emotions, eruptions, origin. It is just water. That's what I'm trying to tell you, says the doctor. Farther away, the nurses take a minute at their station to update one another on the fly. Gary's chemo is really cooking now. It's weird juxtaposition, right? It's like, what did I just hear? Like, is it a cooking metaphor that we're using with these drugs that we're trying to save our lives? But it's the two final ones. Avery, just to warn us, the Aragon Ballroom one, but you come off totally cool in this poem. Yeah, trust me on this, okay? And I shared this with a theologian friend of mine, Dan Trier, just a wonderful colleague at Wheaton. And it helped me because I was frankly kind of unsettled by where this poem goes. We talked about that, riding into the law of life and not quite knowing what you're going to yield. And he really gave me a helpful context to it. He goes, gosh, I think a lament song, that's what this feels like to me, kind of intensity and kind of roughness of it. And so therefore I gave it an epigraph from Psalm 88, again from another Reformation hero of mine, Miles Coverdale. Translation of Psalms that lasted for at least 400 years. I think it's still lasting, but it was in the prayer book, and so it was said thousands of times every day in England. I have been even as a man that hath no strength, free among the dead. Shall thy loving kindness be showed in the grave? Psalm 88. It's another weirdly titled poem. Sad little patriarch rubbing his gloved hands together. And all I can say is this is a poem written from kind of later in my 6 months of treatment, and I'm just kind of bummed. It's just really hard and it's slow and tired, and you get weird side effects, like where the cold isn't just cold, it's like hurting you, a neuropathy, you call it. I think that's a good context here. Some days I feel as old as Father Abraham, doddering father of a teenage daughter who last week attended her first real concert at the crowded Aragon Ballroom in Uptown. When will my own days feel real again? The frozen clock hands begin to turn again. When will this chemical burning in the veins stop and hope, perhaps, be recompensed? I wear this long wool coat against the cold that hurts me, covered with 2 scarves, my face covered to avoid any feeling of cobwebs, with their every thread feeling like a tiny razor blade slicing the skin. There is no ounce of benignity in this feeling. Maybe that is why the winter mask, last week found at Target, most accurately resembles a terrorist accessory, all black hooded with eye slits. Were I to wear it, I would appear on campus like an ISIS recruit. No doubt a most proud servant in his mind, clouded by the violence of the mission and sentence he honors. Oh, the necessary horrors, those airstrikes occurring in the body's battleground, leveled at the cells. If I were to wear the black hood, guise of a hangman, not the one hanged, I fear that campus security would target me. Bucolic space, locked down an emergency protocol. That's all I would be. Self-terrorist, strapped with the various wires of my sickness. The reading's gotten heavier. I want to read one last one. And again, just a really deeply meaningful occasion to be here with you all and to share work. And you're so kind to talk about my stamina after 8 hours. It's been a delight and joy just to be with students, talking with fellow writers, and being hosted so graciously. And yeah, it's just good to be among you in person. This last one, I promise, is a little lighter. It's short and it's simply called Reminders. Just a bit of context. This was being at the Dallas airport, so you hear about DFW, and I'd just been able to visit an old colleague and a dear friend, Alan Jacobs, at Waco, at Baylor. And at one point he just said, I just hate the mess you're going through, and I'm reading these poems, and I'm thinking just what my friend's going through. I haven't totally lost my critical capacity, and there's some heart in these poems, and I just hope you write the blankety blank out of this thing, is kind of what he said. Glad I screened that, remembering I'm being filmed here. But it meant a lot to me, and I'm like, thank you. I'm going to try to. And so again, 2 hours later, I'm at DFW waiting. So this is called Reminders. Overheard in line at a gate at DFW. If things don't go smoothly when I get to Chicago, we're going to need bail money. I'm just putting that out there. So many problems. So many problems other than mine. Everyone facing a problematic thing. So sit down, sorrow. Boarding the plane, I noticed, since the cockpit's open, 2 large bottled waters awaiting pilot and co-pilot. Everybody, even they with self-same humble, vulnerable, limited human bodies. Even they, titanic and aloft in their expertise. Hydrate and carry on. May their fleshy selves also reach the end of this latest day. Fly well and get me home, oh Captain. Thanks very much.